Hello all, so 20 minutes on the transpersonal. I'm going to attempt to answer 4 questions. What is a transpersonal experience? 2, can we verify that it's real, or is it just philosophy mumbo jumbo? 3, if it is real, how can we experience it? And number 4, why is that important for counselling anyway? So if we've got time, we'll rattle through these. Buckle up, we've got a lot to get through. Firstly, what is a transpersonal experience? Patricia Clarkson mentions transpersonal experience as part of her 5 relationships. The transpersonal experience, she said, is the transpersonal relationship. She said it is a spiritual one that defies explanation. Well, you know what? We're going to try and explain it. And to do that, I'm going to use a breadstick. So transpersonal, the etymology is trans and personal. Trans meaning further than, greater than, more than. Personal means me, myself. And we all define that self somehow differently. So transpersonal is an experience of myself where I am more than just myself. Sounds almost like a paradox. Consider the breadstick for a transpersonal experience. It has 2 ends, one there and one there. These ends are definitely different. They are not the same place at all. One's at one end, one's at the other. However, although they are different, they are inseparable, and I'll demonstrate this by trying to remove one of the ends so that I have a one-ended breadstick. There we go, a one-ended breadstick. Oh, I removed the wrong end. Okay, maybe if I remove the other end, maybe this is the removable end. There we go. I've moved both ends. Oh, I still have a 2-ended breadstick. And it seems that there is something about ends that are inherent in the nature of a stick. How about if I just remove one entire half of the breadstick? There we go. Oh, but no, once again, it doesn't matter how much I've tried to remove an end, I'll always have a breadstick with 2 ends. This is inescapable, because we live in a world of dualities, of opposites. The existence of one end demands the existence of another end. You cannot have a one-ended stick. You cannot have a coin with only one face. The existence of one face demands the existence of another. We live in a world of dualities. There is an up only because there is also a down, and there is a left only because there is also a right. And there is an inside only because there is also an outside, which means there is a self only because there is also not self. This is at the foundation of a transpersonal understanding of the world. So that's what the transpersonal experience is. It's when I identify with something other than just myself, because I understand that in order for there to be a self at all, there must be a not self, and my identity has gone now from just myself to including or incorporating at least some aspects of my not self. So that's the definition. Can we verify that it's real? I mean, can't there just be myself in here and a world out there? And, well, you know, the world out there existed before I came along. And if the world suddenly disappeared, poof, I'd still be floating in empty space. I'd still be real, wouldn't I? Well, turns out that not so much. Let's have a thought experiment. Here I have Lionel. Lionel is a lion. Lionel has a brain. He doesn't really have a brain, but it's a thought experiment. Imagine that he has a brain in there. Now, Lionel has eyes. But the eyes, unfortunately, aren't connected to his brain. And his ears, they're not connected to his brain either. Nor is his nose, or his mouth, nor his little paws. He's got no sensory perception of his outside world at all. He's got a brain so he can think, so he's alive and conscious, but he has nothing to be conscious of. There is no outside objective reality that he can perceive and think about. So if we take a minute to think, what would Lionel's experience of himself be like? Well, we might think, oh, it would just be black. But he's never seen any other colours, so would he perceive blackness as black? He might experience silence, but he's never heard noise, so would he understand the concept of silence? Without having an outside world to be aware of, I think it would be almost impossible, probably actually impossible, for Lionel to have any sense of himself at all. Because in order for him to have a concept of his self, he needs a concept of a not self, of an other. And he can't have that because he can't perceive anything outside of himself. So we can see that in order for there to be an inside, there needs to be an understanding of an outside. Without an outside, all Lionel has is awareness, sensation. But he wouldn't think, I am aware, I am having sensation, because there is nothing other than the awareness and the sensation itself. So according to a transpersonal understanding of the world, we see that in order for the inside to exist at all, it requires an outside. So the outside then becomes an essential part of the inside experience. The two, they're different, but they are inseparable. Just like the breadstick, different but inseparable. They arise together. Now that covers Lionel's internal experience of himself. What about the outside world? You might say, that's fine, but without any humans or lions or conscious beings, we would still have a world. Stuff would still exist out there. We'd still have cars and plants and trees. The external doesn't require an internal, but it's not quite as clear cut as that. If we consider the external world, when I look around, what I see is a world of shapes and colours, sounds and noises. Now, colour, turns out, isn't a real thing. It doesn't exist in the world out there. Colour is just photons or particles of light bouncing off things, hitting my retina, which my brain then interprets as a sensation of colour. And it's the same with sound. Sound is just wobbles through the air. The wobbly air hits a diaphragm in my ear, and my brain interprets that as a sensation of sound. But colour and sound themselves, they don't exist out there, they only exist in here. So the world as I experience it, a world of words, of people, of colours, this is just an internal model. This is just my brain creating this so that I can understand the stuff that's out there. So the world as I understand it certainly wouldn't exist without me to create that impression. And you might say that's all well and good, but the physical stuff still exists, right? Well, one of the biggest discoveries in recent years in science, in the last couple of centuries, has been quantum theory. One of the most startling discoveries of quantum theory has been that when you look at things ever more close, from stuff to molecules to atoms, and then you look at the atom really close, and you look at the particles that make the atoms, when you start looking at the fundamental building blocks of existence, particles, it turns out, don't even exist. Not as we understand existence to be. Particles, when you look that close, they exist only as waves of probability. Now, we haven't got time to go into all the ramifications of that, but the fact is that when you look at the outside world and you see a bunch of solid objects, that's just because the scale that we're looking at. They don't actually exist like that. The fundamental nature of matter is of probability. So the outside world requires an inner self to experience it and to give it solidity, existence, and reality. The inner self requires an outside environment in order to have any sense of itself whatsoever. Like the breadstick, the inside and the outside, the self and the not self, require each other for their own existence. You cannot remove one without removing the other. You cannot have one without having the other. So, yes, can we verify the transpersonal experience is real? Yeah, through both philosophy and science. I'd say it's the only way we can truly understand the nature of the world that we live in. So moving on to question 3, if the transpersonal experience is real, how do we experience it? Okay. Ken Wilber, in his book No Boundary, gives us a model of human identity. And we're going to break this model down quite quickly in 5 minutes. We start. This is me. This little fella here is going to represent me. This is my persona. This is Percy the persona penguin. And Percy has an environment. The lion here, Lionel the environmental lion, represents the environment. My persona is tiny compared to the massive environment. The persona represents all those aspects of myself that I'm happy to acknowledge, either to myself or to other people. So I'm happy to show you that I am eloquent, that I am intelligent, that I am kind and thoughtful. I'm not prepared to show you that I'm greedy, that I'm selfish, that I'm arrogant. I'm certainly not prepared to show you any of my sexual or violent impulses, even though I have them. We're not going to talk about them here. My persona is that which I accept and show the world. Now I can, and I often do, identify solely with this. But that's not all I have. And it's a good thing too, because my environment is huge. In fact, far bigger than the lion could ever represent. The world, the universe is massive, and I seem to be this tiny little insignificant thing. If only there was a way I could grow my identity. Well, I'm not just this penguin. I'm also a shadow. The shadow is all those aspects of myself that I'm not prepared to acknowledge to myself or to other people. They are my arrogance, they are my selfishness, they are my sexual and violent impulses. Freud talked about the id and the superego. In transactional analysis, we've got the child ego state and the parent ego states. If we're not aware of them, they're in the shadow. If we become aware of them and acknowledge them, well, then we can include them in the persona. Now, if we're able to fully integrate our persona and our shadow, then we start something a bit like the Russian dolls. Of course, the persona doesn't live inside the shadow. It's an imperfect metaphor. But I want some way to show how the two can be combined together. So I have the persona and the shadow. I'm now popping inside an ego. So Ken Wilber talked about the persona level being where our focus of identity normally is day to day. But if we can include the shadow, then we have a fully functioning ego, which is aware of its own shadow. If I identify with my ego, I'm identifying with bits of myself that I like and bits of myself that I don't like. I'm identifying with all that I am. And I have grown. Crucially, I haven't got rid of my shadow and I haven't got rid of my persona. They're still there, they still exist. I haven't smashed them or destroyed them. I've simply transcended them. I'm now identifying with my ego, which contains them both. At this point, I can think, well, this is great. I've grown a little bit. My sense of identity has grown to include something a little bit bigger. Does it have to stop? Can it grow again? So I bring in my body. Most of us we talk about our body as if it's something that we own. So I have a body. I have a headache, or my leg hurts. We don't often talk about our body as if it's something that we are. We talk about it as if it's something that we have. And the reason for this is we don't always like to identify with our body. Our body can often be sick. It can be painful. It can be tired. It can have its own ideas about what it wants to do. Ken Wilber and others talk about ourself often feeling as though it's riding around on the top of a horse. The body is the horse, and the self is what lives up here. My body is just this fleshy thing that dangles underneath me, carries me around from place to place. I know that my body is going to age. I know it's going to get old and fat. I know it's going to get weaker, and eventually it's going to cause me pain, suffering, and then it's going to die. Why would I want to identify with that? There's a great temptation to disidentify from the body, to say, no, that's not the real me. The real me is up here, or it's my soul, my spirit. The real me is going to live on forever. The body is just a temporary housing. Now, this is all well and good, but it does lead to a disidentification from the body. And the body, let's not forget, is fucking great. It's one of the most, if not the most complicated system in the known universe, if we include the brain, which of course we have to. So the next level of awareness, we've gone from the persona level, we've included the shadow to get an ego. We're now going to include the body, and we come to what Ken Wilber calls the centaur level. A centaur is a mythical being that is half horse and half human. So it contains both the animal aspects of the self, the physical aspects of the self, and the mental, cerebral, spiritual aspects of the psyche. You have them both together, and now I'm identifying with my body as well as just my psyche. Now I can go out into the world with a greater sense of strength and control and purpose. My body isn't a tool that I use, it's something that I am. It's a fantastic feeling of empowerment and growth. And it doesn't have to stop there. And this now is where we come to the transpersonal level of awareness. Because now I am a centaur, which comprises my persona and my shadow, and also my body. I haven't destroyed any, I haven't gotten rid of any. They are all included within one total organism that I call the centaur. And then there's the environment, everything I see around me that's not me. Now, as we've seen from the thought experiments before, one cannot exist without the other. There is no environment unless there is a self to experience it. And there is no self without an environment to give that self identity and meaning. The two are different, sure, but they are inseparable, which means it makes no sense to have them looking at each other with this gulf between them. If they are inseparable, we can put one inside the other. And this is the transpersonal experience. This is the transpersonal understanding of the world around us. It is our persona and our shadow, our ego and our body and our environment in one complete whole. They're not different, or they are different, but they are not separate. They all depend upon each other. How do we get there? Well, we get there just through this understanding. There are yoga, meditation can be a great way of moving toward a transpersonal experience. Really, it's just understanding. And understanding that this is the true nature of reality. This is the true nature of our existence. That we exist in tandem with our environment. We are two sides of the same coin, two ends of the same stick, different but inseparable. Now, quickly, why is this important? Because in counselling, some common things that people come to counselling with: anxiety, depression, loneliness, grief, fear, sense of meaninglessness. How would all these things change if I could see that I am not, in fact, just this tiny little persona against a great big world? How can I feel loneliness if I understand that I am the world? That I am contained within the world and the world is contained within me? How can I feel grief? What can possibly have been lost if everything that exists is me and I am everything that exists? What is there to be fearful about or anxious about if the world is me and I am the world, if we are two expressions of the same whole entity? The fundamental point about all this then is that, like with the breadstick, the ends aren't real things. If they were real things, I could bite one off and it would be gone. But as soon as I bite one off, another one takes its place. The ends aren't real. It's the relationship between the ends that makes this a breadstick. The only thing that's real is the distance between 2 points. It's the relationship. And as it is with the persona and the environment, that The persona is real and the environment is real, but they are not really separate. How the fuck am I going to end this? So the point of all this is, with a transpersonal understanding of the world, we see that we have choice of where we want to identify. Sometimes I can identify with just my persona. Sometimes I can include my shadow if I want a deeper understanding of myself, and I become an ego. Sometimes I can then identify with my body. Sometimes I can identify purely with my body if I want a sexual experience that doesn't have any sort of relational depth, any emotional depth, or if I just want to go out and look really good. If I want to take some cool photos and put them on Instagram, I can identify just with my body, and that's fine as long as I don't forget that there are other aspects and I can choose where I put my identification. And sometimes I want to identify with everything. It's not always suitable, it's not always a great idea, but sometimes I want to identify with the universe around me, and it gives me such a wonderful sense of wholeness, of completion, of unity. Fear and anxiety and depression go out the window. I'm just left with beautiful awareness. That is the transpersonal experience. That's why it's useful, and I hope that's been helpful.